What would you say is the most popular term used today to describe any person who has a connection with Jesus? Most popular term. Used by those inside the church and outside the church. Christian. Christian, okay? The problem with that term is that the secular world lumps anybody that's remotely related to Jesus in the same group. So they'll lump Protestants and Catholics and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and Christian Scientists and, and if you belong to any one of those groups, you're a Christian. But that's not how the Bible views the term. The Bible, actually this is only used 3 times in the Bible, the word Christian. It's found in Acts 11:26. It says, the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. You know who called them Christians? Those outside of their group, okay? In Acts 26:28, one of the governors was talking to Paul, and he used the word Christian. And then 1 Peter 4:16, Peter talks about living as a Christian. Only 3 times. But it's the most popular term used to describe a person who has some kind of connection with Jesus. So, what is the most popular term that the Bible uses to describe someone who has a connection with Jesus? Disciple? Okay. Well, let's take the word believer. We use that term a lot, right? The word believer is only used a dozen times. Now, the action word, to believe, is used many, many times, okay? But the noun is only used a dozen times. But you're right, the word disciple is used over 200 times to refer to someone who has a connection with Jesus. The word disciple means learner. And so a disciple was not just one who just didn't do anything. He or she was learning from Jesus, okay? Now, it's interesting that this term, disciple, is only in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. There's 22 other books of the New Testament. It's not there. But instead, we see the word saint used to describe the believer. And it's used 60 times. I say all this to say this. We're not to get hung up on labels. Jesus wasn't hung up on what people called him or what his group was called. But he was concerned with action. And there's a particular action that he wants all his disciples, believers, Christians, to have in their lives. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We come to Matthew chapter 8, verses 18 through 27. And you may have heard the word that was used. What action was he concerned with? The action of following him, okay? The word is used 3 times in this passage. And it's not by accident that it's used 3 times in 3 different groups. Because Matthew is tackling this as a topic. Remember, Matthew is not arranged necessarily in the order that events happen. If you want to know the order that events happen, you go to Luke's gospel. Luke's gospel tells us at the beginning that he arranged everything in the order that they occurred. If you compare Luke's gospel with Matthew, you will see that there are things switched around in Matthew. That's not because Matthew got it wrong. It's because Matthew has arranged his gospel topically, by topics. And this topic, in this passage, in this group of passages, is the topic of following Christ. We left off last time with Jesus at Peter's house. He healed all the sick who were brought to him, every single one of them. And then we get to verse 18. It jumps to a later time. This could be days later. And Jesus is outside the house along the shore of Galilee, and his disciples are with him. And a large crowd gathers. And he orders his disciples to get into the boat. We're going into the boat and we're going to cross the lake. Well, a crowd, it's when he's about to enter into the boat, that's when Matthew then introduces 3 different people. And it's in these different groups, people that he brings up, that we can ask a question to ourselves. The first question: am I following Jesus wherever he leads? The first person that talks to him is a scribe. Now, in our minds, we often associate the scribes with the Pharisees. The scribes and the Pharisees. That phrase is used 20 times in the gospel accounts. The scribes were the experts in the scriptures. They were the interpreters of the scriptures. They also knew the oral traditions that were passed on by previous rabbis. In fact, the scribes were the rabbis of Jesus' day. The word rabbi means teacher. Notice what the scribe calls Jesus in verse 19. Teacher. Now, for the most part, scribes and Pharisees were opposing Jesus. But here this scribe recognizes Jesus as a greater teacher than him. I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus should have been thrilled. Here is a rabbi, a scribe. He's not opposing him. He should be thrilled to have a rabbi following him around. This rabbi had seen the healings. Man, it's wonderful. Jesus healing everybody, every single person. He had heard his teachings. Jesus teaches in a different way. It's not the same way as I teach or the other scribes teach. And the people are listening. And the results, he gets crowds. He was caught up in the thrills of all that was going on. And Jesus brings him back to reality by these words. Hey, the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Boy, Jesus, you talk strange. Now I got to think of what that means. Well, it's not all thrills, is it? Foxes and birds have a place to go every day. They have a home that they can call home all the time. It's one place. But that's not so with Jesus. Jesus' ministry required travel. For now, he was staying at Peter's house as he was ministering in Capernaum. But as he traveled throughout the region and throughout the different regions, he might have to sleep under the stars or in a cave. And anybody following him would have to do the same thing. Or maybe they might be fortunate enough to be put up in someone's house. But he could not call any place home. Oftentimes, Christianity is portrayed as all thrills. And it's true that when I first came to Christ, it was very thrilling. If you gave your life to Christ when you were older, in your teenage years or older, you probably remember the emotions that went through you. I know I was very emotional. It was a thrilling time. I was excited. I was exuberant. I was joyous. I was wanting to share with everybody. It was completely against my personality. But that was just the beginning. That's just the beginning of my relationship with Christ. It was not all thrills. Because then Jesus said, you're going to have to do things that you don't like to do. You're going to have to change some things in your life. And there are things that you're going to have to sacrifice. Are you willing to follow him wherever he leads? When Donna and I got married, we knew that the Lord was going to provide someday a church for me to pastor. Our idea was to go back to Minnesota. That's where she calls home. That's where I called home, even though I lived in about 17 different places before that. But that's where I grew up in my teenage years, so I called that home. And our idea was to come back to where our family was, pastor around there, raise our kids so that they can be around family. But the Lord led us here to Michigan, to this church, and it's over 800 miles away from family. It certainly was a test. Will we follow Christ wherever he leads? Let me tell you a story about Shafia. Shafia is a Pakistani young adult. She has 11 other people in her family. And they live in a Christian village in Pakistan. Pakistan is 98% Muslim, 2% Christian. And their family found a village that it was all Christian in that village. They wanted to be apart from the Muslim world. 17% of the population is radical Muslim. That's Al-Qaeda. That's, those kinds of Muslims. And it's those kinds of Muslims that persecute Christians. And that's why they have this village. Well, one day a Muslim mob raided the village. Her brother was led by Jesus to stand up against this mob. And believe it or not, him standing up against the mob stopped it from happening, stopped the raid. But they didn't like it. So they came back and, in a sneaky way, captured him and shot and killed him. They wanted to make sure that Shafia wasn't going to do anything about that, so they kidnapped her. And they tried to force her to become a Muslim. When she refused to do that, they locked her into a room. And they beat her, and they raped her. You know what she was led to do? Pray for them. Then the family of 11 members were led to do something just unbelievable. They found out where she was, and then they decided to go through the legal system to prosecute the people that kidnapped Shafia. It required a great sum of money. And so they went to an owner of a kiln that made bricks and borrowed money from him, but he said you would have to submit to slave labor. 12 hours a day making bricks. And for every 1,000 bricks you make, I will knock $3 off the loan. They were there forever. But they were willing to go wherever Jesus led them. And they made these bricks. And then the voice of the martyr stepped in and paid off the rest of the loan. I'm not sure how long they were making these bricks, but it's while they were making these bricks that Shafia was led to do something else, to forgive her abusers. And she said, when I did that, she said, a peace fell over me that I can never explain. I can't even explain. Sophia and her family knows what it means to follow Christ wherever he leads. Is the Lord leading you somewhere? You know you need to go. Or maybe it's not somewhere, maybe it's someone that he's leading you to. Or maybe it's to do something like forgive or to make amends with someone. The Christian life is not all thrills. Much of it is going to difficult people and places and doing difficult things. Will you commit right now to following Jesus wherever he leads? So we're going to have just a few 10 seconds or so of silent prayer. I want everybody to bow their head. And I don't want you to pray this prayer if you're not willing to make that commitment. But if you're willing to make the commitment, and this is something you should do every single day, because you've probably done it before, but we need to recommit every day, saying, Jesus, I will follow you wherever you lead. You pray that prayer if you're serious about doing that right now. The second question. Will you follow Jesus without delay? The second person is called a disciple. He wasn't one of the apostles, okay? He was one of the people that were following Jesus around while he was in Capernaum. The apostles are many times called the disciples, okay? All the apostles were disciples, but not all disciples were apostles. There were only 12 apostles. So here is a disciple. He's one of the crowd. He wants to be connected with Jesus. He wants to follow Jesus wherever he goes. But he says, I need to do something first before I do that. And he asked Jesus permission to go and bury his father. And Jesus replies in a way that sounds pretty cruel. Follow me and allow the dead to bury their own dead. Now, Jesus, where is your compassion here? Here's a guy whose dad has just died, and you're saying these words to him? Do you not have sympathy for this man? Well, if we analyze the request of the man a little closer and the response of Jesus a little closer, we're going to see a totally different situation. You see, the man's father was not dead. The Jewish custom, whenever a person died, was this. They would immediately prepare the body for burial. And they would bury it the same day. Unless it was really late in the day and they didn't have time, then they would do it the next morning. But for the most part, the day a person died was the day they buried the person, and then they had several days of mourning. If this guy's father was dead, he'd be missing the burial. He certainly wouldn't be spending time following Jesus around, okay? Well, maybe the man's father was sick. Wait a minute. Didn't Jesus heal everyone? All he had to do was bring the father to Jesus to heal him, right? Or if he was too sick to come, he could at least ask Jesus to heal him. No, this father was old. And the man was concerned with, I don't know how long I'm going to have with my father. I would just like to spend the last months or years that we have left together, and then I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus' response is eye-opening if we understand what he is saying. First, he commands him to what? Follow me. Now, the word follow it should be translated, keep following me. It's in a tense that it should be translated that way. He was following him all around already. But you keep following me. And then he says, let the dead bury their own dead. Now, when he says let, now your version may say allow, permit. I find it interesting that the ESV and the RSV translate it as leave. Leave the dead to bury their own dead. This word actually is translated more times as forgive. When you forgive someone, what are you doing? You're leaving it in the past, aren't you? You're abandoning whatever the offense is. You're leaving it behind. And so he's saying you need to leave the dead to bury the dead. Okay, let's see. I'm going to leave the dead. Well, he doesn't mean physically dead, because physically dead people can't bury other people, right? So he must mean spiritually dead. Leave the spiritually dead to bury their own dead. Leave the spiritually dead to have this excuse to saying, I'm going to delay in following you, Jesus. That's the excuse of an unbeliever. The spiritually dead. Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 20, or Luke chapter 14, verse 26, that we cannot be his disciple if we do not hate our own father, our own mother, our own brother, sister, wife, and even our own life. Now, what is he talking about when he says hate? He's saying when you put them in a position of being more important than Jesus. That is called idolatry, where we elevate someone above our Lord as being more important. That is called idolatry. People may put money above him, may put people above him, may put yourself above them. That's worshiping other gods. We shall have no other gods before him. And so Jesus demanded, if you're going to be my disciple, you need to love me more than anyone, anything else. So here are some questions that you can discuss with your family later on today, or with a friend or whatever, okay? But please answer these questions. What demonstrates that I love Jesus more than I love my family? Now, I'll be the first one to admit, there are times that I love something more than I love Jesus. There are times that I might love a certain person more than I love Jesus, but it's only for a moment, okay? I know it's wrong. Jesus is not talking about an instance here. He's talking about a lifestyle. My lifestyle is that I love Jesus more than anything. Now, I might fail at that at times, but that is my lifestyle. So the questions here, look at your lifestyle. What in your lifestyle that you do demonstrates that you love Jesus more than you love your family, more than you love your friends, more than you love money? Here's the third and final question. Are you following Jesus with complete dependence? The third time the word follow is used, it refers to an entire group. After Jesus talks with the scribe and with the one disciple, he actually gets into the boat and he tells the apostles, the 12 apostles, to follow him into the boat. But he uses the word follow. And it's not by accident that it's there, because Matthew is going to make a point about these particular followers. They get into the boat, and what does Jesus do? He decides he's going to take a nap. You know, Jesus only did what the Father told him to do. He wouldn't speak unless the Father told him what to speak. He wouldn't do something unless he said, I see the Father doing that. So he did nothing on his own. He was always led by the Father. So he's waiting on the Father. I might as well take a nap. So he's in the boat napping. All right? The apostles are guiding the boat across the lake. Well, they are in an area in the Sea of Galilee, which is a huge lake. The shoreline that they came from is lined with mountains, okay? So wind can come down off those mountains, and, it can be calm one minute and gale force winds another. And what it does to the lake, it just makes gigantic and huge waves. So a storm suddenly came up. And the disciples, the apostles here, were so fearful that they thought they were going to die. It was rocking the boat. But, Jesus was sleeping like a baby. He, rock a baby, rock-a-bye baby. He was content. He wasn't worried. He slept through the whole thing. And so the disciples wake him up. And they ask him in desperation to save them from the storm. Now notice how Jesus responded. And notice when he responded. He asked them a question, not after he calms the storm, but before. It reminds me of this movie, where these guys are being shot at, these two guys are being shot at, machine guns going at them, they're having a conversation. Hey, you ever seen those kind of movies? I'd be worried about those bullets flying at me. It's like, here he's having this conversation, and the waves are just crashing over, and they're talking. And what are they talking about? Fear. Why are you afraid? Their fear was unfounded. As long as they were with Jesus, they had nothing to worry about. Jesus had a mission to complete. He wouldn't complete it. He wouldn't complete it. What I'm saying? He wouldn't fail to complete it. So he's saying, your fear is unfounded. But they found a reason anyway, and Jesus calls them people of little faith. Well, at least they had some faith. I guess a little faith is better than no faith, right? But little faith robs us of experiencing God the way he wants us to experience him. If they would have responded in great faith, it would have been a total different teaching moment for them. A better teaching moment, actually. What should they have done? Should they have just ridden out the storm and let Jesus sleep? Should they have, we'll just rebuke the storm ourselves, just like he can cast out demons, we can rebuke the storm. Well, I don't think it's a matter of what they did or should do or should not do, but rather why they acted the way they did. They acted out of fear. So if they would not have acted out of fear, that is showing faith. Fear and faith are incompatible. When we fear, we lose our dependency upon God. And we're letting fear drive us instead of our dependency upon God to drive us. While Donna and I were engaged, she expressed fear to me in becoming a pastor's wife. She was about to break off the engagement. Now imagine if she was driven by that fear. You would never have known her. In fact, you probably would never have known me, because the only reason I'm here is because they wanted her to play the piano. That might be a little exaggeration, but we need to let faith drive our decisions. Don't be a person of little faith and be robbed of experiencing God in a certain way. So exercising fear is never rewarding, but exercising faith is always rewarding. Jesus wants us to be people of action, not just ones that hold a title: saint, believer, Christian, disciple. The action he wants us to have is following him as a lifestyle, wherever he leads, without delay, and with complete dependence upon him. The following words from a hymn sum it up well. "Take up thy cross and follow me," I heard the Master say. "I gave my life to ransom thee. Surrender your all today. It may be through the shadows dim or over the stormy sea. I take my cross and follow him wherever he leadeth me." Wherever he leads, I'll go. Wherever he leads, I'll go. I'll follow my Christ who loves me so. Wherever he leads, I'll go.